To kick off, first of all, if we could go back about 3 weeks now, 3 weeks yesterday, I think it was, Hamas from the Gaza Strip launched a pretty ruthless terrorist attack onto Israel. And I just want to say, and I think I speak for Harold here, we condemn that, of course. It's terrorism is not a way to sort of get things done in the world for sure. But Israel have responded to that, and in my opinion, that response has been massively, a huge overreaction to what has happened. And this is starting to split the world between the collective West, who are, to use the words of the British Prime Minister, unequivocally supporting Israel. And the sort of rest of the world pretty much, who are sort of playing a much more neutral stance. And China are one of those that are pushing a much more neutral stance. And there's a massive, to me, there's a massive contrast here, where I see that China, along with Brazil and to some extent Russia, are leading the process to try and bring a ceasefire to this situation. I mean, I personally, I feel terrible at the moment, in the sense that, Israel have just literally bombed Gaza for 3 weeks solid, and that bombing is intensifying. Now, I understand they want to take out Hamas, but it seems to me that the way they're going about it, they're not just targeting Hamas, they're just targeting the Gaza Strip pretty much wholesale.
Yeah.
And it's
I want to chip in 2 points about what you said. Like, one is condemnation of Hamas. I think I want to qualify to make clear the Palestinians do have a right to armed resistance, because they have a territory that the United Nations gave them, and that should be a country. And by the way, most countries outside the West do recognize that territory as the
for
Palestinian
sure.
country. And it's occupied by Israel, which gives the occupied nation the right to armed resistance. But that, of course, has limits in the international law, which does not include killing innocent civilians, or even if you think guilty civilians, by the way. There's no distinguishing in the international law between guilty and innocent civilians. You cannot just kill unarmed people, old, young, just because you think they did something bad to you. They would have a right to a trial. And so that was the part that I condemn. But I do understand that the Palestinians fight back, and they have a reason. And the second point I wanted to make is very much in line with the idea of this show. As Lee said, the entire Western elites, the governments, they stand like limitless support for Israel. Whatever Israel does, they stand behind it, but not the people. Like I've just seen today pictures from protests in London. I think it was huge protests
Not just
pro-Palestine.
London, all over the world.
Right, all over the world, yeah.
There's huge protests everywhere now, because I think people are seeing, just what's going on. And it's got worse, because yesterday Israel cut off all telecommunications. Even the emergency services telecommunications in Gaza have been cut. And this is against all worldwide conventions, and I find it unbelievable that the leaders of these Western nations are not speaking out about it. Actually, I think that one of the latest United Nations resolutions, France did actually vote in
Yes.
favour of. But you look at the US and the UK, they have voted against every resolution that has been put before the United Nations, and a majority of those resolutions are calling for a ceasefire, and humanitarian aid to go into there. And the next thing I want to raise the point, if you look at the contrast between what China are doing and what America are doing. So China are trying with Brazil and Russia mainly trying to negotiate a ceasefire for a start. I mean, yes, we want a solution, but that's going to take a long time because it's very, very complex. But, and on the other hand, the opposite side of the coin, all the US are doing is just sending more arms and battle groups. First they decided to dispatch one battle group, carrier group, then a second, and now it's 4. And there's increasing sort of stuff that's coming out in their media and media of the UK, suggesting that Israel need to be put in their place. And I worry that that this is the preemption of an attack on Iran.
Yes, I think it's right to worry, although I have to say I don't worry that much at the moment, because what I see is, I mean, I'm not pretending to be a military expert, but what I see right now is a force that's mainly Air Force. It's the carriers, it's destroyers that can intercept missiles, which is what Israel hopes for, to get support with the air defense if Hezbollah starts shooting all those tens of thousands of missiles and rockets that they've prepared. They would have the whole Aegis fleet that can shoot down those missiles. And they have the arsenal, the airplanes to bomb Syria, Lebanon, the places around Israel. That's what I'm worried. And I think that's what they're planning at the moment. Like the most insane statement, I think it was yesterday, 2 days ago, by Kirby, the Speaker of the U.S. Armed Forces, whatever his exact position is, where he said, these are defensive strikes because our bases in Syria were attacked. And nobody said, like, no media fought back and said, like, how can that be defensive? These bases in Syria are illegal. There's no legal basis with which the US has military bases in Syria. I put out a tweet yesterday saying, so if China manages to put up a military base in the US somewhere, and the US then starts legitimately attacking that Chinese base, that would then mean that the US can that China can defend itself against US aggression. That's like the weirdest kind of logic to call that defensive. And so that's what I think the US is preparing. So on one side, the defense, like to help out with the Iron Dome, that's clearly cracking. And on the other side, to really start a bombing campaign, Iraq, Syria, against supposed Hezbollah locations. But I'm afraid they will use the same logic as Israel, like when in doubt, just bomb, and don't care too much about civilian casualties because it's just Arabs. I mean, that's a cynical take, that just Arabs. I don't mean that myself, but I think that's the mindset of those leaders in the US who currently really fan the flames. And maybe also on another cynical level, another war. Biden he's lost in Afghanistan, the war, he's losing in Ukraine. So now he needs some victory before the elections. And so he wants to use overwhelming force like Bush did in Iraq, like kind of jealous that Bush got his big invasion. So he uses now several carriers and this whole air force of the US to bomb some militia forces that have no way of fighting back.
Yeah, the reason I mention Iran though is that the neocon faction of the US administration, they've been itching for a conflict with Iran because they see Iran, they impose these sanctions on them, and these sanctions have had a larger effect initially, and then you had countries like China and Russia who started to deal much more with Iran. So pretty much the US sanctions have become a bit useless, and it just makes me feel as though they're itching to sort of start a conflict, because obviously the US believe they can win a conflict with Iran, and I just think they're itching to attack, to start something, because they think they're going to finish Iran once and for all. That's my feeling.
I think some of the people in the US do think so, especially the political leaders. I don't think the US military thinks so because they're aware of how the US wars have been going recently. But I also want to remind people when the US attacked Afghanistan, they assembled forces for quite a long time around Afghanistan to march in. Same for Iraq. They had like a million, like literally million soldiers to go into Iraq. In the end, they won quickly, but they won quickly because this overwhelming force. At the moment, I hear, what was it, 20,000, 40,000 Marines, something like that.
Yes, yes.
That's a small expeditionary force. And if you discount the logistics, that the guys cooking food and delivering the ammunition and fuel and everything, you got a small fighting force. You're not going to invade Iran with 10,000 fighting people.
Of
So
course not.
I mean it could eventually lead to something. It could mean that they start to provoke further escalation, which then allows Biden to go for war. But at the moment, I don't think we're there. So I think that's, yeah, we'll see.
Well,
And I see in the
let's
chat
hope
some
not.
people them maybe Newsom will replace Biden. I'm not that much an expert of US internal politics. Do you want to add something about China's role, or do we want to
Yeah, I mean, as I
jump
say, I see China. I mean, Wang Yi is extremely busy at the moment. I mean, in my eyes, Wang Yi is probably one of, if not the most sort of professional diplomat negotiator in the world at the moment. I also hold Lavrov in quite high esteem. My feeling is they're way better than some of the negotiators and diplomats from the collective West. But I think I think that what will ultimately happen is there'll be a decisive vote brought. I think that the resolution that came before the General Assembly, I think it was yesterday, was non-binding. But I think they're sort of working the way, I think, some of the BRICS nation countries are working the way to sort of really isolate the US within the United Nations. And as you see, I think some of the European leaders, after all these massive rallies in some of their countries, will really have to start to think about their positions. And as you can see from the last vote, France, Macron, he actually voted for that resolution. And I think politically, more and more of the Western leaders are going to have to sort of start considering their positions, reevaluating their positions, because I think for a leader like, I say, the UK, to unequivocally support Israel after the images we're now seeing on our televisions, they're going to find it difficult to maintain that position with a backlash from the general public. But I think,
as Trevor Norman just says in this chat, thanks by the way for that one, protests supporting Palestine are starting to affect mainstream media in the UK. I think that is indeed an issue. I think Europe in this respect is still a bit more democratic as the US, by the way. I think people's voices have a bit more of an impact on daily politics. Although I don't think on the big picture is European politics is controlled by the US, or influenced by the US. But on individual topics, I think the people do have a bit more influence. It's easier also because countries are smaller. So if you have 1 million people walking in London, in Paris, it's hard for politicians to ignore.
For sure. I think it will be really interesting to see, because I feel the UK are probably one of the strongest allies in former Europe with the US. And if you look at every vote so far in the UN around this, the UK have voted with the US, and it will be interesting to see if they break rank at any point. I'll be quite interested to see if they do so. But I think the peace initiative, from what I see so far, is definitely being led by China, Russia, and Brazil. It seems I would imagine there's a lot of discussion between the major BRICS nations at the moment. And it was very interesting that the Arab nations all kind of collectively brought that resolution to the UN yesterday. So they are obviously all turning. They used to be somewhat afraid of the US, and I think that position is also changing with regards to the Arab nations for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's very interesting times.
Yeah, I think we can segue into the next segment. In terms of peace initiative, I'm pessimistic, to be honest, for Gaza, at least for the next few weeks, if not months. But if we look at the big picture, I'm with you. China stands with the global south and with the majority of the world.